The folder on the conference table was thin, cream-colored, with a little gold-embossed seal in the corner. The kind of folder that law firms use when they want bad news to look expensive. My father's estate attorney, a dry man named Harrington, who smelled faintly of old coffee, slid it across the mahogany toward my brother without even glancing in my direction. Not once. Like I was a plant someone had put in the corner of the room for decoration. My brother Spencer picked it up. He was trying to look somber, the way people do at these things. But I'd known his face for 31 years, and I could see the corners of his mouth working hard not to lift. He already knew what was inside. I realized that the moment he didn't reach for the folder, he let it come to him. I sat in that chair and breathed. Just breathed. Because I'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you can do in a room full of people who underestimate you is show them they got to you. Let me back up. My name is Sloane. I'm 33 years old. I'm a corporate restructuring attorney, which means I spend my days walking into failing companies, reading their financials the way a doctor reads an X-ray, and figuring out exactly where the rot started. I'm good at it. I've been doing it since I was 26. Since I passed the bar on my first attempt while waitressing double shifts to cover my bar prep course, because my father had told me, very calmly, that law school was a fine ambition. But Spencer's MBA at Wharton was a family priority right now. Spencer never finished the MBA, by the way. He left after 14 months to explore opportunities. Those opportunities mostly involved my father's credit card and a series of business ideas that dissolved like sugar in rain. A craft brewery, an app that he described as Uber but for dog grooming, a consulting firm that had no clients and a very nice logo. But Spencer was the son, the firstborn, the one who sat at my father's right hand at Thanksgiving while I passed the green beans and tried not to notice that my father introduced me to his friends as, "My daughter, she does law stuff." My father died 8 months ago. Cardiac arrest, sudden, no warning. I flew home from Chicago in the middle of an acquisition closing, sat with my mother through the hospital hours, handled the calls, handled the arrangements, handled everything the way I always handled everything, quietly, completely, without being asked. And then we got to today, the reading of the will. Harrington cleared his throat and began reading in that practiced monotone attorneys use to drain emotion out of language. The house, to my mother, that was expected. The investment accounts, split between Mom and Spencer. The vacation property in Hilton Head, Spencer. The classic car collection, Spencer. The business, my father's regional trucking company that he built over 40 years, the thing he'd talked about with more tenderness than he'd ever talked about me, transferred in full to Spencer T. Calloway. I counted the ceiling tiles, 12 across, 8 down. My mother reached over and pressed my hand. She was crying. She thought she was comforting me. She had no idea that I wasn't devastated. I was calculating. Because here's the thing about growing up, the invisible child in a family with money, you learn early that love isn't reliable. Systems are. Documentation is. Leverage is. I had known, for approximately 18 months, that my father's trucking company was in serious trouble. Not because anyone told me. Because 2 years ago, I had been home for Christmas and my father had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he went to get more eggnog. And I am, at my core, a person who reads things. I saw the name of the lender. I recognized it. I dealt with that particular commercial lending firm in 3 separate restructuring cases. They were not known for patience. When I got back to Chicago, I pulled the company's public filings. Then I called in a favor with someone at the credit bureau. What I found was methodical and grim. The trucking company was carrying $4.2 million in commercial debt. The equipment was aging, the contracts were shrinking, and Spencer, who my father had installed as VP of Operations 4 years ago, despite having no logistics experience whatsoever, had been making decisions that were, to use a technical legal term, catastrophically stupid. He'd let 3 major freight contracts lapse because he didn't want to renegotiate the rates. He bought new trucks on credit when the old ones could have been rebuilt for a fraction of the cost. He'd hired his college roommate as CFO. The college roommate as CFO. The college roommate had a marketing degree. I watched this for 18 months. I didn't say anything. My father wouldn't have listened. He never did. Not about Spencer. Not about the business. Once, early on, I gently mentioned that the debt load seemed high for the revenue they were running. My father had nodded slowly and told me he appreciated my concern and that Spencer had it well in hand. So I stopped talking and started acting. I am a corporate restructuring attorney. I know exactly how distressed debt works. I know exactly who buys it, how they buy it, and what rights they hold once they do. Over 14 months, through a series of legal entities that I structured carefully, I acquired $2.8 million of the trucking company's outstanding commercial debt from 2 of its secondary lenders. They were happy to sell. Distressed debt holders often are, when a patient buyer offers them 60 cents on the dollar and a clean exit. On paper, I was nobody. The debt sat in a Delaware LLC with a name that gave nothing away. I was the sole managing member. I had said nothing to my father. I had said nothing to my father. I had said nothing to Spencer. I had said nothing to anyone. Now I sat in Harrington's office while my brother accepted ownership of a company that owed me $2.8 million, listening to him try to keep the smile off his face. Harrington finished reading. Spencer leaned back in his chair and made a small, satisfied sound that he tried to disguise as a sigh of grief. My mother was still holding my hand. She kept looking at me with that soft, anxious expression, waiting for me to crumble. "There's one more item," Harrington said, shuffling papers. He looked at me for the first time. "Your father left you his personal library and the piano." The piano. I hadn't touched a piano since I was 14. "That's very meaningful," I said. My voice was completely even. "Thank you." Spencer turned to me then. His expression was doing something complicated, trying to arrange itself into sympathy while the satisfaction leaked through the edges. "Sloane, I hope you know I'm gonna run this company the right way. Dad would have wanted us to work together. You can be involved." "I appreciate that," I said. He was still talking. I had stopped listening. I was looking at Harrington's window, at the gray November sky behind it, thinking about the certified letter I was going to send in 6 days. On day 6, I sent it. The letter was from the LLC, addressed to Spencer as the new sole owner of Callaway Regional Freight. It informed him, in precise and courteous legal language, that the company was in technical default on $2.8 million in commercial debt obligations, that the debt had been acquired by my entity, and that pursuant to the terms of the original loan agreements, I was invoking the acceleration clause. The full balance was due within 90 days. I then formally requested a creditor meeting. I found out from my mother that Spencer called the letter a mistake. He was sure it was a mistake. He told her some debt collection company had gotten confused. He called Harrington, who called the LLC's registered agent, who responded with a polite email containing my name and my Illinois bar number. My mother called me that same evening. Her voice was very careful, the way it gets when she doesn't know how to feel about something. "Sloane, honey, Spencer says you own part of his debt." "I own a substantial portion of the company's outstanding commercial obligations, yes." Silence. When did you?" "About 14 months ago." "Does Spencer know? Does he understand what that means?" "He's about to." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Were you always planning this?" I looked out my apartment window at Lake Michigan, dark and flat in the evening. I thought about the Christmas I was 17 and asked for a used car to get to my after-school job, and my father bought Spencer a trip to Costa Rica for spring break. I thought about the bar exam fees I'd paid with tip money. I thought about sitting across from my father 3 years ago and walking him through a detailed financial memo I'd prepared on the company's debt exposure and watching him fold it in half without reading past the first paragraph. I was always paying attention, I said. That's not the same thing. The creditor meeting was held at a downtown Chicago conference room, neutral territory that Spencer's attorney had requested. Spencer flew in from Pittsburgh. He brought Harrington and a restructuring consultant who looked about 28 and kept clicking his pen. I came alone. I have learned over many years that walking into a room alone, when the other side has a team, sends a very specific message. It says, I am not worried. It says, I have already won this in my head, and I am here as a courtesy. Spencer looked tired. He hadn't been sleeping. I could see it in the skin under his eyes, that thin, bruised look. He'd spent the 6 weeks since my letter trying to find alternative financing. I knew he'd tried 4 commercial lenders. I knew because 2 of them were firms I'd worked with, and people talk in this industry. He hadn't found anything workable. The company's debt-to-revenue ratio made traditional lending nearly impossible, and the equipment valuations had continued to decline. He sat down across from me, and for a moment he just looked at me, not with anger, with something that was almost wonder. You bought our debt, he said. Not a question, just saying it out loud like he was still getting used to the shape of it. I purchased distressed commercial debt at market rate from willing sellers, I said. It's a legitimate financial transaction that happens every day. Sloane, he leaned forward. That's Dad's company. That was Dad's company. Dad left it to you. Now it's your company with a significant debt obligation. You're going to foreclose on it. I'm going to exercise the rights that the loan agreements provide, yes, unless we can reach an arrangement that works for both parties. His attorney, a man from Pittsburgh who had the look of someone used to being the most prepared person in the room and was currently discovering he was not, cut in. Ms. Calloway, I think what my client is trying to understand is the end goal here. What exactly is it that you want? I opened the folder in front of me. I want 3 things, I said. First, a formal audit of all company financials from the period of Spencer's tenure as VP of Operations. Full access, independent auditor, findings to be shared with both parties and with the estate. I looked at Spencer. If there are irregularities, I want them documented. Spencer's jaw tightened. The pen-clicking consultant went very still. Second, I continued, I want a structured repayment plan on the debt I hold. 36 months, standard commercial terms, no games with the balloon payments. Spencer's attorney was writing quickly. And third? Third, I said. I want a formal letter, signed by Spencer and witnessed by Harrington, acknowledging that the estate division was his father's decision, made unilaterally, and that I have no legal or financial obligation to any family member arising from it. I paused. I wanted in writing that what was given to him was not mine to give. The room was quiet. Spencer stared at me. I watched him work through it, the anger first, then the calculation, then the slow recognition that the calculation wasn't going his way. The company needed those 90 days. He needed that repayment plan. Without it, the business would fold. The remaining lenders would circle, and he would walk away from our father's 40-year legacy with nothing but a liability. Why the letter? He finally said. His voice was different now, quieter. Because for 33 years, I said, every time something was taken from me and given to you, it was called generosity. I want one piece of paper that says it wasn't. He didn't answer for a long time. His attorney was studying the table. The consultant had put down his pen. Spencer looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I could remember, he seemed to see something he hadn't expected. Not the little sister who did law stuff. Not the one who could be handled. Something else. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. We spent 4 hours going through terms. His attorney was good, actually. Thorough, careful, not adversarial. Once he understood that I wasn't interested in destroying the company, only in being treated like a party with rights. The audit was the thing Spencer fought hardest on, and I understood why. There were irregularities. I had suspected it from the filings. We agreed on an independent auditor we both approved, with findings sealed pending both parties' review. By 4 in the afternoon, we had a signed term sheet. I walked out of that building into the November air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The lake was 2 blocks west. I could smell it. That cold, clean mineral smell that Chicago gets in late fall when the tourists are gone and the city is just itself. My phone buzzed. My mother. I answered. "Spencer called," she said. Her voice was subdued. Not angry, something more complicated than that. "He told me what happened. He told me everything." "Okay." "Sloane." A long pause. "Why didn't you ever tell me? About the debt? About what you were doing? You could have told me." I thought about all the times I had tried to tell her things. Not just about the company. About the bar exam fees. About the Christmas with the car. About the time I won a national moot court competition at 22 and called home and she'd said that was wonderful and then immediately pivoted to asking if I'd heard that Spencer had gotten into Wharton. "I didn't think it would change anything," I said. She was quiet for a long time. "That's not, Sloane, that's not fair, to either of us." "No," I agreed, "it isn't." I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. I heard the particular quality of the silence of the house I grew up in, the refrigerator hum that I could identify from 30 years of listening to it. "I should have paid more attention," she said finally. "It was small and it was insufficient, and it was also, I knew, as close as I was going to get to certain things." "Yeah," I said, "you should have." We stayed on the line a little longer, not talking much. Just being on the phone together, which is sometimes all you can do. I didn't go home right away. I walked to the lake instead, hands in my coat pockets, watching the water move in that heavy gray November way. I thought about my father's company. 40 years of freight routes and contract negotiations and 4 a.m. dispatch calls. I thought about how much he had loved it, and how thoroughly he had believed that loving something meant only one person could inherit it. I thought about the piano. I had actually loved that piano. I'd taken lessons from age 6 to 14, gotten genuinely good at it. The kind of good where my teacher had told my parents I had real potential if they wanted to pursue it seriously. My father had nodded and said that was nice, and 2 months later he'd spent the money earmarked for a summer music program on Spencer's travel soccer league fees instead. I'd stopped playing shortly after that, not in protest. I just stopped having access to whatever soft part of me music required, because I needed that part for other things. He left me the piano. I didn't know what he meant by it. Maybe nothing. Maybe he thought it was valuable. Maybe somewhere in there he remembered the teacher's words and meant it as an acknowledgement of something he'd never acknowledged directly. I would never know. That's the particular cruelty of losing a parent you have unfinished business with. The business stays unfinished. The conversation you kept putting off never happens. You just carry the piano. The audit, when it concluded 3 months later, found what I expected it to find: misappropriated company funds. Not massive. Spencer wasn't a criminal, just someone who had never learned to distinguish between his money and money adjacent to him. Golf trips expense to the company. Renovation costs for his Pittsburgh townhouse built through a freight subsidiary. The auditor's term was commingling of funds. The total came to just under $180,000. We resolved it privately. Spencer repaid the amount into the company account over 8 months. The findings were documented, sealed, and held. I told him straight if he ran the company cleanly going forward, they stayed sealed. If he didn't, they wouldn't. He's been running it cleanly. As far as I can tell, the independent monitoring was part of the arrangement. He called me last spring, a real call, not a formality. He was trying to renegotiate one of the old freight contracts and wanted to know if I had any contacts at the corporate office of the shipper. I did, as it happened. I made one call. He thanked me. The way he said it was different from how Spencer usually said things, less performance in it. I don't know what we are to each other now. Not what we were, which was the golden sun and the footnote. Not close, not easy. Something that doesn't have a clean name yet. 2 people who know exactly where they stand, which is more than we had before. My mother came to Chicago in February. We went to dinner at a place in Wicker Park that she liked because it reminded her of a restaurant she'd loved before my father's career moved us from the city when I was 4. We ordered too much food and a bottle of wine, and she told me about a pottery class she'd joined, and I told her about a case I was working on, and we talked around the big things the way families do, carefully, leaving them in our peripheral vision while pretending to look elsewhere. At the end of the night, over decaf coffee that neither of us needed, she said, "I think your father was prouder of you than he knew how to say." I looked at my cup. "I think he probably was," I said. "I also think that matters less than what he did." She nodded. She didn't try to argue it. That was something. I had the piano moved to my apartment. It took 3 movers and a very stressful hour with a freight elevator. It sits in my spare room now, by the window that faces the lake. I've started playing again, just in the evenings, just when the day's been particularly long and the part of me that argues for a living needs somewhere else to put itself. I'm not as good as I was. 20 years of not playing will do that. But I'm better than I expected, and I'm getting better every week. I sat down at it last Thursday after a 14-hour day and played for 2 hours without stopping. And I thought, as I played, that this is maybe what inheritance actually means. Not what you're handed, but what you refuse to let them take from you. The thing you kept so quietly inside yourself that no one thought to put it in a document. No one can transfer that deed. No one ever could. I think about the piano a lot lately. Not just the instrument itself, but what it represents. The version of me that almost got buried under years of being overlooked, passed over, quietly erased from the accounting of what our family valued. Someone almost got away with that. And for a long time I let them, because I didn't yet understand that patience and surrender are not the same thing. What happened with my father's company didn't start the day Harrington slid that folder across the table. It started years earlier. Every time I watched a decision get made and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was busy doing something more useful than arguing. I was learning. I was documenting. I was building the kind of understanding that doesn't announce itself in a room until it has to. People sometimes ask me if what I did was fair. I thought about that seriously because I think it deserves a serious answer. Spencer didn't set out to be cruel. My father didn't wake up each morning and think about what he was taking from me. They operated inside a system of assumptions they'd never been asked to question because no one had ever made it costly to keep those assumptions. That's not an excuse, but it matters because it means the thing I was fighting wasn't one person's malice. It was a whole structure of comfortable blindness, and you can't dismantle that with a single argument at a kitchen table. You dismantle it by becoming someone the structure cannot ignore. That took integrity, not the word of the year kind, but the quiet daily kind. The kind of means you don't cut corners on your own work, even when the people who should be watching aren't watching. I paid my bar exam fees with tip money. I built my practice the same way I built everything else. From the bottom, without shortcuts. Because I understood even then that what you build honestly is the only thing that actually holds when pressure gets applied to it. Spencer learned that the hard way. The company's debt didn't lie. Numbers never do. It also took the willingness to think clearly in situations designed to make you emotional. The morning of the will reading, I could have walked in angry. I had every right to be. But anger in that room would have cost me everything I'd positioned for. What I had instead was something colder and more useful, a clear understanding of the facts, a correct read of the incentives, and the discipline to wait for the right moment. That's not coldness. That's the kind of intelligence that only develops when you've spent years having to be twice as prepared as everyone else just to be taken half as seriously. And then there's the part nobody talks about, the stamina it takes to keep going when the people who were supposed to be in your corner weren't. Every year I filed another tax return, closed another case, and got a little better at a job my family didn't fully understand. I was making a choice to keep building something real even when no one in that house was paying attention. That persistence wasn't stubbornness. It was the refusal to let someone else's limited vision of me become the ceiling I lived under. Spencer and I aren't enemies now. That matters to me. I didn't want his destruction. I wanted acknowledgement, and the only way to get it was to become undeniable. The letter I asked him to sign, the one that said what was given to him was never mine to give, was the only thing in that entire process I truly needed. Not for legal reasons. For the record. For the version of me at 17 who deserved to have someone write it down. I play the piano on Thursday nights now. I'm getting my reach back.